Our hangout is live.
We have a live hangout.
We do indeed.
We are hanging out in live.
We are hanging out. That's a better way to put it. We are hanging out right now.
We're hanging out. And is it live though? Because I think the topic discussion today is going to be about, are we living in a simulated reality?
Yes.
So are we live? This is the question. Or is this all make-believe?
So you made a couple of comments over the last calls regarding the simulation theory, and we said that we were going to go away and do some research in preparation for the call. How has that affected your opinion of it, and how did that go?
Well, I mean, the thing about my opinion is that I don't really have an opinion, or rather, my opinion is completely open, because a wiser man than me once said that you either have enough information to make a decision, or you need to do more research. Don't make a decision until you know. Don't close your mind off to something and assume you know the answer until such time as you have enough information to make you categorically convinced that you have the answer. And seeing as we live in a world with scientific methodology, then we should be able to scientifically make a method scientifically of proving or disproving whether we're in a simulated reality. And until we can do that, then surely the only answer is that we have to be, if you like, almost kind of agnostic about it and keep an open mind.
So this sounds like it's going to be a bit of a short call.
Well, not really, because I think, granted, we can't currently scientifically measure whether we're in a simulated reality or not, because we can't. I mean, even if you could, then if you can measure whether you're not in a simulated reality, and you can prove emphatically that this is definitely real and not simulated, then you could argue that could be simulated. The results could be simulated, and therefore that the scientific methodology that you're doing could easily be simulated. So I don't think it's ever going to be possible to prove that we're not in a simulated reality.
Now that comes back to one of the things we talked about previously, which was the burden of proof. So what I was going to say was that because it's not provable, we have to operate, or you don't have to, but until there's significant evidence to suggest that it is the case, we kind of have to operate, as you said, just as though it's not the case that we're in a simulation.
The thing is,
my example was going to be, if there was a tear in the sky with some code in it or something, that's what I was thinking. There would be evidence to suggest that it may be the case that we're living in a simulation. But since nothing like that exists and there isn't a way necessarily to prove it, then it doesn't necessarily have to be a simulation. It could be anything. It's like it reminds me of the teapot behind the moon thing, when someone claims that there's a teapot like the dark side of the moon. Well, there's no way to disprove that that's the case, but until someone provides evidence that is the case, we are stating that it isn't.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it's like everything. You could talk about religion and God and whether... I mean, in some ways, there's quite a crossover about it, because it's about being a creator, and we have to assume that if we're living in a simulation, then somebody created it, and that if somebody created it, then there is a creator. And are they a deity? Are they a god? Are they God to us? I mean, could they just be like I heard someone else say, well, it could be just a 5-year-old little boy playing, setting up a very complex simulation. But perhaps whoever creates this, assuming that we are living in a simulation, whoever created the simulation, they may be wildly more intelligent than us, and in fact, our level of intelligence, they may have specifically created us to be just so intelligent as to ask the question, but not quite intelligent enough to actually figure out the answer to the question as to whether we're simulated or not. So that we'll never actually find the answer out.
coming back to what you said about the creator thing, in the research that I did for this conversation, there was a load of sort of famous atheists and scientists who had, like, for example, Dawkins and Neil deGrasse Tyson, like those types of people that have previously sort of, not really been open to the concept of a god or a creator, but in this context,
I think it makes almost more sense.
Yeah, as though it is okay. But I would say that it's the same argument. So there's no evidence to suggest that it's the case.
It is,
and
the
therefore,
same. So you must be agnostic.
Yeah.
Or
because there are different definitions. So there are some atheists that claim that there shouldn't be a word for it because all atheism is just not believing things until you have sufficient evidence or proof for it.
Which is basically something that we're never going to have the answer to. So I'll tell you something quite interesting, slightly getting off topic. But my 12-year-old daughter the other day, not yesterday, the day before yesterday, said to me, "Daddy, I just realised something today." I said, "What did you realise?" And she said, "God and the devil, they're not real, are they? They're just like made up." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, God is a concept." And I thought, she's been listening to John Lennon songs or something. But the fact is, and I said, what made you think that? And where did you get that idea from? She said, "Well, I was in my RE class doing religious education, and I suddenly thought, this is just all nonsense." And she said, I had this eureka moment where it's kind of figured it all out. And I thought, well, she's very young, I think, at 12 to be sort of coming to that conclusion. But she's also, apparently believes in Father Christmas still. But at the same time, and obviously Father Christmas is real. But the point is that, she's able to analyze in her mind and weigh up whether something is likely to be real or not. And a lot of religions, if you are not sort of, I guess for want of a better word, raised or indoctrinated into that religious way of their sort of their rituals and their sort of philosophy and the way that their history describes the world, then they're absurd. I mean, a lot of them are absurd. The Mormons, for example, where Jesus walked around in the USA and all sorts of things happened there, and he ended up in Salt Lake City. Absurd. And what about the Scientologists?
I was just about to say that.
I mean, we're all, was it several billion people were transported?
Aliens.
Several billion aliens were transported in something that resembles like an old DC-3 aeroplane or something, from a distant universe onto the Earth, and then they were kind of they were nuked, and their souls survived, but everything else was wiped out. And somehow we've all kind of inherited their souls, and we're in conflict with each other. We're in conflict with our alien soul, and this conflict needs to be addressed in order for us to sort of reach the next level, some nirvana or whatever it may be. And therefore, I mean, so on and so forth. I mean, when I say that out loud, it just sounds so utterly absurd. You can possibly try and convince anyone that was true, and yet many people are perfectly happy to accept that as the truth, And so, this is the same. It might seem completely absurd that we're living in a simulation, but to me, in many ways, it doesn't seem that absurd. I mean, as far as we can see, the universe is mathematical, which kind of lends itself to sort of computing in some way. Why would it need to be mathematical? Well, maths is I've heard maths described as the language of the universe. And it seems to me that, if you can break everything down mathematically, then it's not so different from the way that computers work.
I heard that there's, I didn't actually see much on it, but I have seen that there is a physicist who's found computer code within the laws of science or something like that.
I came across that. I haven't actually.
I didn't watch it either.
It's on my list of things to watch for this, actually.
But if we just suspend the burden of proof for a second in terms of just looking at the arguments, which is sort of what we're doing anyway. You mentioned the billions to one thing in the last call, where you said, because it's like a connection of dots, right? So will we create we already sort of have created worlds for simulation for people,
things like that.
And based on where we were, this is an interview with Elon Musk that I watched. Based on where we were with computer games when they first came out, for example, to where we are now, when we're literally creating sort of lifelike experiences and we can create worlds and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you look to the future, what's possible, and you think that once you can create one, you can create many, then we're one of, as you said, billions.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Then it is possible to think that we're part of that as well. The only... trying to think of my argument. I think what I was trying to get at was I kind of thought of it as like a VR thing, so virtual reality. Would you have to know that you were in it? I think
if it was good enough, you wouldn't know, and you could forget even, couldn't you? If you get so enveloped in something, you forget. The thing about it is that if we look at Sims, for example, my girls, they like Sims 4. They're always going on about it. I don't know if you've ever come across it, but it's a simulation of, I guess, a little town, and you can create people and their families, and they go to work and they go to the toilet and they make food and all sorts of things, and they get pets and you name it, and they do it. It's not the sort of thing that would keep me entertained, but my girls love it. And the point is that these little Sims, they walk around and they're semi-automated, so they have code in them. And that code dictates their behavior to a lesser or greater extent. And you can choose personality types, you can choose what they look like, you can do all that kind of thing. And then they're just sort of semi-automated and do their own thing, and you kind of look after them and guide them somewhat. So Sims, we have to assume that they have no level of consciousness. We don't actually know that they don't. It seems illogical that they would, right? Why would they?
But wouldn't that be in the programming?
In the programming, but I mean, nobody really knows what consciousness really is at this point. And in fact, with regard, my point I was trying to make with the Sims is that we assume they don't have any level of consciousness, and that they're just, they don't know what they are. They don't. If there was a mirror in Sims, they wouldn't recognize themselves in the mirror, and so on and so forth. And therefore they have no level of consciousness, so they've got no form of artificial intelligence or no awareness, and so they don't really exist. We don't give them a second thought, right? But the point of the matter is that perhaps a more advanced level, maybe they do have consciousness, maybe we don't really know what it is, but certainly in the more advanced level, if we're talking about artificial intelligence, which we're supposedly getting closer and closer to now already, then it's quite feasible that in the simulation, the simulants would have artificial intelligence. I mean, is it not the next logical, progression of Sims 4? If artificial intelligence was alive, would it not be? Yeah, they actually, you can almost watch them. You can create them, and you can watch them. They're having their little life. I mean, it seems logical to me that and I don't think they're necessarily that far away. They wouldn't have to have particularly developed artificial. There may be quite a lot of confines to what they can learn and can understand. I mean, I'm not a computer programmer, but it seems to me that artificial intelligence, as we were led to believe, that it's a computer that then can access all the other computers in the world, Skynet, and then destroys the world to save itself, right? But I mean, the fact is that that might not be the case. I mean, if they're all relatively dumb, for example, then, for example, a dog doesn't necessarily need to understand how to drive a car, but I've got a dog, I open the door, the dog gets in the car, and I drive it. The dog doesn't need to understand anymore, and so whether it was a simulated dog or a real dog, it has no requirement to learn that. So if there were people in Sims, for example, and they have a level of artificial intelligence, that's the universe that they would know. Whether to us it looks really fake and there's no real texture to this, and it would be a very basic version of Sims. But I mean, the old computer games when they first came out, they were very basic. I don't know if you remember some of them. They were incredibly basic games. Even the first 3D ones, like what was that horror one where you walked around shooting people? Doom. But Doom was in a completely new level because it was kind of a 3D maze and you walked through it and you shot monsters and things. But compared to modern graphics, I haven't seen it for years. It might be interesting to have a look at it. But it would be so...
I don't think you'd be very impressed.
No, exactly. And so, maybe Sims would be like that, but to them it would be real because they'd be artificially intelligent, at least to a certain level. And for them, that would be the universe that they know. They wouldn't know what computer they were on. They wouldn't know the person who's playing the game. They wouldn't know any of these things. They would simply know that that's their environment and that's where they live. So I think that given that, it's quite feasible that we are in a simulation. And apart from anything else, Darren Brown and people like this, and they manipulate things, and magicians use close hand magic tricks,
like misdirection.
Because your brain automatically fills in lots of gaps that actually, our perception of the world is not the world as we know it. It is just a perception, and they've done many experiments with all sorts of things, gorillas walking past in the background, and people simply don't notice them because they don't expect them to be there, and yet they are there. And so, or are they, because it's a simulation, obviously. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that we fill in so much stuff. And the other thing is, again, talking about a dog and the different level of intelligence and things like this. My dog doesn't see the world now because I've only got a puppy, as you know. I only had the puppy a few months, and so I had dogs when I was a kid, and I just took them for granted because they were dogs and I grew up with them and all the rest of it. But now I've got a dog, and I'm kind of coming to terms with how she is and how she views the world. For her, it's just lots of different smells and lots of things. I mean, she walks down the street with me, and yet her perception of the street is radically different from my perception of the street. And I don't mean just because she's way down there and I'm way up here with a different viewpoint. I mean, all the things that I find interesting, or my brain sort of focuses in on, like, is there a car coming here? There's an attractive looking lady over there. Oh, look, there's a sale on, or oh, look, somebody's phoning me on my phone, or whatever it may be that's distracting me at any one given time, or just my own thoughts. She's walking down the street at the same time, and she is a different species to me, so she has a completely radically different viewpoint and understanding of the street, and everything in the view that she sees may be radically different from the way we look at it. And so it's not good enough just to say, well, I can see the world around me, I can touch and feel things, so therefore it must be real and not simulation. It's just not a good enough argument. I don't know what you think about that, but it's just not.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit of a thought experiment, though, isn't it? So you have to be willing to entertain that such a thing might exist, because we haven't had any experience of that, because our technology is not good enough, and therefore we haven't already created it, so we haven't seen it, and therefore it doesn't exist. But
there's a couple of sort of maybe incidental things that I can link in my mind. The way my brain works is that it links into this, and this is where it came from the first time. I discussed what I discovered. There's a name for it, the ancestor paradox. And I actually did a bit of research because I may have been a researcher in the past, but I kind of had this new idea, and for some peculiar reason, it didn't occur to me that other people had this idea in the past. And it's a very well documented thing called the ancestor paradox. In that, as you go back in time, every generation you have two ancestors for each generation, and each ancestor has two. So you've got the doubling effect, and you have exponential growth going backwards into the past. And so it seemed to me that the the sheer weight of numbers means that it's physically impossible. There's no possible way, and there is a way that it could happen. So if you had a room or an island, for example, and you had a mother or you had a man and a woman, they were the founding parents or founding fathers, whatever you might want to call it. They had children, and then their children incestuously, there was a girl and a boy, 2 in each generation, and every single generation thereof had a girl and a boy, and they only ever, had a girl and a boy each, and this thing went on and on and on and on, all the way down the generations. I mean, I've no idea what they'd look like, because presumably they would have many genetic defects. But at the same point, these people could go 20, 30, 40, 50,000 generations and only have one mother and father, and only, and there's never, the population's never got bigger or smaller. So it would be possible then. But it's just not, that isn't reality. Reality isn't like that. And so I look at this and I see this as a number that kind of makes me think, well, hang on a minute, this number, this impossible mathematical certainty, because we know that every person who's ever been born has one mother and one father, and we know that they're not all brothers and sisters, and they're not even all cousins. I mean, how many people in your family that can you think of who married their cousin? Well, I'm sure if you go back far enough, it was much more common than it is today, and even in certain parts of the world, it's more common than it is here. But even if we all married our second cousin, I forget the name of this guy. He did a lot of research into this back in, I think, in the 70s and the 80s. And he was from the northeast of England. And forgive me because I have a poor memory for names, and it's gone. But he worked it out. And he said, well, if we all married our second cousin or our first cousin, but let's just assume everyone throughout the generation marries their second cousin, and every 30 years there's a generation. And all of our cousins live within 20 miles of each other throughout all of the generations. How far back do we go before we're related to absolutely everyone in the British Isles? And the answer, he was surprised to see, is we can only go back to the year 1400 AD, roughly. And that's assuming a 30-year, which in my own family, I could go back 10 generations, and it worked out to 25 years on average per generation. But he's saying 30 years per generation on average. And you can only go back, and then he drew a map. He put together a computer program, and he put many times, he did the program, he ran it several times, I don't know how many times, maybe like a simulation we'd be doing again and again and again. And it came out with different results each time, but they were all more or less the same. And there was a median result. And the median result was he had a white map with an outline of the UK, and one dot for each relative of his going back through the generations. And it turned out that each dot was red, and the map came out red. The UK came out in red on white background almost every time. So in other words, yes, we're all related to everyone else in the UK, assuming this mathematics, and this is assuming we only marry within 20 miles of each other, and we all marry our second cousin. And even then, we cannot go further back in history than the year 1400 before we're all related to each other, everyone in the UK. And that's just the UK, but the UK is an island, but it's not isolated. We've all got foreign relatives. Even in my 10 generations, I mean, I had countless foreign relatives, and surprisingly so. From the Caribbean, from the United States, from Holland. I had relatives from Ireland, and all sorts of places. So, this to me, what got me thinking about this in the first place. And I've never heard anyone talk about that as a potential, there's the ancestor paradox, which has not been cracked, and it doesn't get a lot of attention in the media, but it is an impossibility. We simply cannot all, it just doesn't work out. Because we didn't all marry our second cousin. It just didn't happen. So, and we couldn't possibly all be, related to the same single mother and father ancestors, essentially. In the year 1400, we can't be related to every single person in the UK in the year 1400, surely. I mean, but clearly we are, because the maths say we are. And that's being extremely, so this to me is something that sort of throws some question onto the things we just see as normal and we don't really think about. There's a lot of things we don't generally think about, which kind of don't make sense. What was it that Morpheus said to Leo? Do you ever wonder if there's? I can't quote it, so I can't quite put my finger on it. But he says something along the lines of, "You ever sometimes think there's something just not quite right?" Well, it's that. But there's other things, another thing that I hear quite a lot about is the Drake equation, which is also about the Fermi paradox. Now, the Drake equation was a scientist called Drake who came up with this equation to work out the probability of there being aliens and whether we're really alone in the universe. And so he posited certain things, and he made some assumptions. And assumption number one was that we know how big the universe is roughly. And since he did it in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, I think it was, we know a lot more about the universe, and so we can sort of fine-tune his equation somewhat. But essentially, the universe is about 90 billion light years in diameter. That's 90 billion light years in diameter. The known universe, as we know it at this point, as we understand it, of which there are about 100 billion galaxies, each with between 100 billion and a trillion stars on average. So planets are really much more common than we first thought, and habitable planets, there seem to be a lot more of them. Recently we've made some impact and discovered there's a lot more planets that are in the so-called Goldilocks zone. So we're looking at potentially suns that can support the right sort of temperatures for life, and the planets that are roughly the same size as the Earth and are within the sort of not too hot, not too cold zone. So in the Milky Way, there are about 20 billion sun-like stars, because if we look beyond the Milky Way, the size and scale of space is so infinitely big that if there was anyone in space there, it would take them billions of years to reach us. So there may be countless.
It's called the observable universe.
Well, this is the observable. Yeah, and we're only talking about the observable universe. So the observable universe is about 90 billion light years in diameter, with 100 billion galaxies, each with 100 billion to 1 trillion stars in each galaxy. So you can already see the numbers are just literally astronomical. They are beyond. Certainly I can't comprehend those kind of numbers at all. It's in a totally different dimension. And so, of these, the chances that we are the only planet are unbelievably slim, and that we're the only of all of these planets. The chance that we're the only one with a civilization are astronomically small, literally, because the sheer number there must be. Even if we are incredibly rare, there are so-called filters that you have to go through. The Fermi paradox comes across this, which is why, if there are aliens, why don't we know them? And it posits that there are all sorts of filters. And one of them is the sheer distance. So of these 90 billion light years in diameter observable universe, all but the Milky Way is so far away that civilizations would come and go before they could actually reach us. So, it doesn't matter if they're there or not. We'll never know about them because the distance is just too far to go unless you can bend time and space and somehow. So we can write those off. But it comes across certain things, and they all tie into the are we in a simulation? Because actually, when you think about it mathematically, it seems more and more likely that we are. The reason being that if we just forget all of the other galaxies, if we just look at the Milky Way alone, there's about 20 billion sun-like stars. We're estimating about 20 billion suns, essentially. Not just suns, stars that are similar to our own sun. So stars that could potentially support an Earth-like planet. And that's just in the Milky Way. And about a fifth of these stars have Earth-sized planets in the Goldilocks habitable zone that we discussed earlier. So if only 0.1% of these habitable planets had life, then that would still be about 1 million planets with life in the Milky Way alone. 1 million. So even if there were some civilizations in the Milky Way that have generational spacecraft, to put this in perspective, it would still take them billions of years to reach all the other habitable planets in the Milky Way alone. So if they just all decided that they built almost an infinite number of billions of spacecraft that were able to travel at incredible speeds, and they said, we're going to explore the Milky Way, and they all set off at the same time, it would take them billions of years to reach all the other planets. So they may be on the way to us now, and we wouldn't know. So the point of this is that the Fermi paradox says, well, okay, the Drake equation comes about and says, well, there's this many planets, this many of that, and so on and so forth, and it breaks down the numbers to a smaller and smaller amount. So, for example, in the Milky Way, we know that there is about 1 million planets with life based on the equation. Now, there may be none except ours, but there may be millions, but we don't really know. So we have to estimate using this equation based on the observable universe and the numbers that we know, what's the likelihood. So it's a very approximate guess. But even so, if only, of these million planets in the Milky Way alone, never mind the rest, and in the context of the simulation, it doesn't really matter where they are. So it could be 1 million different civilizations out there. And then so the Fermi paradox kicks in at this point and says, well, some of them will have died, because how long does a civilization last, and how long is it in its point where it could potentially create simulations and all the rest of it?
Well, that's one of the arguments for why the simulation theory wouldn't be valid, is because we won't last long enough to be advanced enough to create something like this. So how quickly or how long does an advanced simulation go before it just kills itself off?
Well, that's true. And this comes back to Nick Bostrom, and I think he's probably the most famous of all people who looked into the potential of simulation. I think he was pretty much evenly, I think at the end of it all, they said, what do you think? He said, I think you can just pluck out any kind of statistical number that you like. But I think he said about 50%, 50-50. We just don't know. So it's got to be, until you know, it's going to be 50-50, right?
No, I would take issue with that. And it may not be the best analogy, but Dawkins, coming back to this similarity between the creator, Dawkins says that whilst he can't know that there is a God, that doesn't necessarily mean that the chances are 50-50.
No, that's true.
So he says he's not strictly an atheist because he doesn't know that there's not a God, but on a scale of like 1 to 100 or something, he'd very much be, in terms of the evidence, he'd very much be on the 98% probability that there is no.
No, that does make sense. But you mentioned something earlier, which was quite interesting, which was, would civilization survive to that point? And so Bostrom he speculated about these things, and he came up with a few assumptions, 5 assumptions, in order.
I've heard this is one of the things I was going to speak to you about.
Right, well, there you go. So assumption number 1, it's possible to simulate consciousness. Now, we talked about this earlier a little bit. We don't really know what consciousness is yet, but I've heard that it might be possible to, sort of almost 3D print a brain and essentially have all of the structure of a brain. Maybe we're not quite there yet, but we might be soon at a point where we can 3D print a brain and we're already able to 3D print other organs and things like this. So we're getting there. And if we're able to 3D print a brain, would that brain work? Or would it just be a dead brain? I mean, we don't really yet know what consciousness is. And this is one of the weirdest things that, for thousands of years, people have said, what is consciousness? What is it? And we still don't know. I mean, going back to my dog, we have a big mirror in the hallway I've got a flat, and there's a big mirror in the hallway, and a lot of people will say that if you take even a monkey or something like this and put them in front of a mirror, they don't recognize themselves. And I had a thought the other day.
There's a self-awareness tests, and there are a few species. One of which, a weird one, which is the crow, where they do the self-awareness test, and they put like a sticker on their beak or their head or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's how they determine at the moment whether an animal is self-aware or not. And there are animals that are self-aware.
Well, there must be. I mean, it makes sense, but it's difficult to. I mean, most certainly, even an ant, if you hover with your finger over an ant will run the other way to try and escape your finger. So it must have some kind of awareness. And so the point is that sort of almost a mathematical sort of thing, or does it feel fear? We don't know. I mean, but we throw our own. We kind of like assume, if you like, that others think the same way as we do. And this is what I mean about my dog, because my dog looked in the mirror. The first time my dog saw the mirror, I was fascinated to see what her reaction would be. And she looked and she thought it was a dog. And then very quickly she became bored with it, and now she doesn't look in the mirror at all. And yet when she looks in the mirror, she sees me in the mirror, and if I do something, she'll then turn around and look at me. So she clearly has an understanding that it's not real, that it's a reflection. And if she can, I stand behind her and she's looking I get her to look in the mirror, and she looks in the mirror, and I do something with my hand. If I held a sweet up or some like a bone or something in the mirror, then she doesn't look to the person holding, to my reflection holding the bone in the mirror. She looks to me, and she'll come straight to me. So she understands that, right? But the point is that we assume that because she isn't fascinated by her own reflection in a sort of narcissistic way, that she doesn't kind of understand that it's her. And it got me thinking, because I was walking down the street the other day with a dog, and I look at this, and humans live in a very, very visual world, and we're very looks obsessed. We're judged on the way we look. Women in particular are judged on how they look. Men are judged on how they look as well. I mean, if someone wears a tie to a business meeting, for example, and that same business meeting person, if they wore a tie to, a swimming gala, they'd look out of place, right? So there's a lot of etiquette around look and this and that, so we're obsessed with it. So of course, when we look in the mirror, we look at ourselves and we go, is that a spot there? Am I losing my hair? Is that a grey hair? What's going on? You're looking at yourself, are my eyelids saggy? All these kind of things. Have I shaved properly? Have I got something in my teeth? We're obsessed with it. And yet dogs have no interest in looks whatsoever. They like smells. The mirror has no smell, and therefore she has no interest, in my opinion, and I came to this just 2 days ago. I think my dog understands that it's her, but she's literally no interest. None. Because it doesn't mean anything to her. And so, she clearly recognizes herself in the mirror, but has zero interest. She recognizes herself in the mirror because she ignores herself, and she doesn't ignore other dogs. She goes crazy whenever she sees another dog because she's a puppy and she wants to play. And she ignores herself, and yet she doesn't ignore me, and yet she looks at my hand if I do something behind her back. She sees it in the mirror. And so I just don't think that's valid. I think that getting an animal to sit in front of the mirror, we're essentially reviewing their behavior based on a human way. We're assuming that they would look at that and have the same thoughts and feelings as a human would. And I just don't think a monkey isn't. When you just look at the way they interact with each other, they don't really care about, does their hair look nice today? Does their bum look fat in this? No, their bum does look fat in this and hangs out and it looks disgusting. But they don't care about it, right? So why should they then suddenly look in a mirror and go, oh my God, that's me? They don't care. And so I think, assumption number one, is it possible to simulate consciousness? I don't think we've got even the remotest first step in terms of even understanding what consciousness is. So I think we're nowhere near that personally. Number two, technological progress will not stop at any time soon. So, in other words, and this links on, in my opinion, to assumption number 3, which is advanced civilizations don't destroy themselves. So technological progress will not stop anytime soon. It seems to be accelerating. 100 years ago, electricity, we had things like this coming in, and a lot of parts of the world didn't have them. Now everyone's got their mobile phone and so on and so forth, and things are progressing ever faster. So I think it's safe to assume that even if we don't understand about what consciousness is, we can certainly assume number 2, which is technological progress will not stop anytime soon. And we're fairly close to being able to create a simulation, a basic one, albeit, but a simulation. And we're fairly close to being able to create possibly a basic version of artificial reality. So I think we're close there. Advanced civilizations don't destroy themselves, number 3. So, well, I mean, who knows? But assuming that they don't, then that takes us on to number 4, because we already know that the technology will continually advance, and if they don't destroy themselves, it's going to continue to advance and get better and better and better. And so super advanced civilizations want to run simulations. Well, we already want to run simulations. I mean, Sims 4 is a very popular game.
Relative to an advanced an advanced version of ourselves or an advanced species. I mean, I know that we do, but we're only advanced relative to other stuff that we know already.
That's true. Yeah.
Or other beings that we know already.
So, yeah, you're right. So, yeah, maybe to another being, we're like an amoeba. We're an amoeba, just like floating around in a stagnant pond somewhere, no interest in them whatsoever, and nothing to offer them in any way. So maybe this is, one of the obstacles. Maybe the aliens are out there and they know about us, but they're just not interested in us. Just as my dog isn't interested in her reflection in the mirror, because there's nothing of interest for us. I mean, we're just pond scum to them, But I think it's safe to say that if looking at us as an example, if we were able to get to a more advanced place and we didn't destroy ourselves and technology continued to advance, there would come to a point where we're making assumption number 1 that we can create artificial consciousness. Okay, so if we're able to do this, then we're going to create a simulation. I mean, the alternative is that the simulation, we can create simulation, but we can't create artificial reality, artificial simulated AI, right? So I think Second Life is an example of this, where people, I think they create an avatar and they, I don't know what they do, but they walk around in this artificial world. I think, I looked into it years ago and I just found it to be, because I like the concept. Hence, I guess we're discussing, are we living in a simulation now? I like the idea of a sort of virtual reality there. But I just found it to be, of no interest to me, like my dog's reflection in a mirror. So in fairness, I looked into it years ago and I haven't gone back, because maybe I should, right? See how it's advanced. But
I'm sure it will have done.
Well, it must have done. But the point is that, would they want to run simulations? And I think they would. They would, maybe for an anthropological perspective. Maybe they want to run it. All around the world, there are people scientists running experiments on mice and things like this, right? Because they're a close approximation to a human being, and you do experiments on the mice, and then you do experiments on a dog or a monkey or whatever. And then finally, when they've passed all these tests, then you do experiments on a human. Now, there's a whole other ethical discussion that we could have about that. But in terms of running a simulation, you could do these experiments on the simulated people, and you could you could run all the experiments consecutively, or you could run them all. They could all be done at the same time, and you could have all sorts of controlled variables. And if these simulated people believed themselves to be real, and they were coded to be almost exact copies of real people, then that would be, I think, something that would almost certainly happen. Don't you think? I mean, why wouldn't they do that? I mean, bearing in mind there's an ethical I mean, I just think that even, the ethics, we'd have to get past capitalism for a start in order to get past the ethical issue, because at the moment we live in a system where ethics go out the window because we're, for the greater good, so to speak. I wouldn't want to torture a cat or a rat or grow an ear on a little mouse, but these things happen. So I think we have to assume that they would run simulations. And that's assumption number 4. Then assumption number 5 is that if there are a lot of simulations, you're probably inside one of them, because there's probably millions and millions and millions of them, and there are probably way more simulations than there are real worlds. And if you closed your eyes and you had a dart and somebody put you in a room, and on the room there were lots and lots and lots of little bits of paper, and one of them was the real world and the rest were all simulations, because there could be billions of simulations, and some of them may be very complex simulations, some of them might be quite simple. But if you closed your eyes and you span around and you just threw the dart randomly, the chances of the dart landing in the real one, in the piece of paper that represents the real world, would be billions to 1 potentially, depending on how many pieces of paper there were. So based on Nick Bostrom's, I guess, his assumptions, we are more than likely living in a simulated world. But it's still difficult for us to accept that. And do we even want to accept that?
I think it's important to go with what the truth is, regardless of what your wants are. Your opinions don't really matter with respect to the greater truth of things. There are a lot of assumptions there.
There are a lot of assumptions. There are.
But if you accept those assumptions, then yes, it might be the case that we are in a simulation. But what I thought of something which you said to me a little while ago, which was, it was actually a topic about the end of the world. So, and you said, isn't it interesting how there are people who think that the end of the world will happen in their lifetime, because we want to think that we're special somehow, and that it's probable that the complete end of the world will happen when I'm alive.
No,
whereas it's quite unlikely to be the case.
Yeah,
and I think it's a good argument for this, in the sense that it's actually quite unlikely that we would discover that we're in a simulation whilst we're alive.
No, I think you're right. I think it's just at the moment it's almost like an academic discussion, because we're never really going. Well, you never know. Somebody might tell us tomorrow, but would we even believe them if they did? They say, here's emphatic proof that we're living in a simulation, and and that,
you have to, though.
It would be very. I mean, people can come up with all sorts of things and say things, and the proof would have to be completely overwhelming in order to.
Yeah, any evidence has to be good, right, in order to believe it. But what my point was, that all this stuff is quite new to us with respect to simulations and video games and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But go, I don't know, 100 years from now, there might be something else that we discover that we can't even fathom right now, which gives us more of an idea about why we might be here.
True.
This is all very new, and it just so happens that we've discovered this now, and we're looking at it and thinking, oh, maybe we're in a simulation, when there might be a much better explanation in 100 years' time.
I agree with you. And then, I mean, the things that we're now pondering, which we couldn't have maybe thought about before, because we had no awareness of them. I mean, but I guess my point is this, that even if we can never know the answer, it's still a valid topic of discussion, and it's still a good idea to keep your mind open about it, because what if we are living in a simulation? What does it actually even mean to us? I mean, it might mean absolutely nothing. We discover that we're living in a simulation. That's it. I mean, nothing changes, because the world, whether we're in a simulation or not, it's all real to us, right?
Yeah.
So,
Do you think that your life is worth less if it were a simulation that someone just created versus the real thing? Because one of the arguments is one has to be real in order to create all the others. One has to be the beginning one. So would your life be more valuable if you were the one that created all of the others? Not even the individual, but one of the real ones.
I suppose you could argue that it would be, because without you, none of the others would have been there. So, but then going back into the ancestor paradox, if your ancestors weren't there in the beginning, then you wouldn't be there either. But I saw a documentary, and they drew out a line. They said something. It was something like, I forget the number now. It's like 300,000 ancestors between the first African, Homo sapiens and us. Well, not even Homo sapiens, the first humanoids to come out of Africa, as we currently understand the process. And they drew on the computer screen a nice graphic showing all these people, a long line of people all in a line, to represent all of the generations. Now, the funny thing is that I was already thinking about generations and this, that, and the other before I saw that. And it was interesting to me that the line was factually inaccurate, because there was only ever one person in each in the queue. It was like a single file queue the whole way back 300,000 generations. And of course that's complete nonsense, because if they put the reality, which is that it doubles each generation back, it would, it would blow everyone's minds.
Fit it on screen.
You wouldn't be able to fit it on the screen. And how many people were there running around, climbing out of trees? No wonder they all climbed out of the trees. They ran out of trees. No wonder they all started walking. There was nowhere else for them to go, because there was literally an practically infinite number of them if you go back that far. I mean, I have no idea what kind of number that would be. Something to the power of almost infinite itself, because doubles each generation back. So no matter how big it gets, just one, the parents came from double the amount. So the point is that all of these things, they kind of make me question whether any of it's really real. Because that was the first thing that made me think about this. I mean, I suppose we've always, probably all of us have always kind of thought about it slightly, and that's why everyone likes The Matrix, because it's kind of your idea a little bit. But
I must admit, I never considered that we would be in a simulation.
Really?
When we first talked about this discussion, I thought, no.
Well, I'm not here to convince you, because I'm not convinced myself, but I am hopefully going to sort of, at least I've got you thinking about it, because
It's a slightly interesting philosophical discussion, because if you provide a premise, then you require an argument as to why that's not true. You can't just reject it based on nothing.
Yeah.
And we addressed that like the first part of the chat, which was you need evidence to back up a claim. But if you just, say, go into it further, you can examine different parts.
I think there are certain things. I mean, like you mentioned earlier, that somebody's said that they found some kind of code. I mean, it sounds like fake news to me a little bit.
No, it's just an example of evidence.
But
oh, you mean the physicist?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit like fake news. There's so much of that going around. It's unbelievable. But in fact, this morning I saw on TV there was some kind of I don't know when it happened, but there was a lot of stuff in the media about Marmite. If you eat Marmite, it reduces dementia. And there was this big thing in all the newspapers: Marmite, eat Marmite every day for breakfast and toast, and it will reduce dementia, and blah blah blah. And they were all quoting this study that had been done, and so they spoke to these people on this TV show. They spoke to the woman who conducted the study. She said, "I couldn't believe all those things when I saw it." She said, "We did like a few hundred people aged between 20 and 35, none of whom had dementia whatsoever. And what we were trying to discover is whether it has any kind of effect on epilepsy. And somehow, it comes out that it's all about, eat Marmite and you won't get dementia." It's just incredible.
It's like Chinese whispers.
Oh yeah, but to the nth degree, it's a crazy thing. But yeah, so essentially, it's that. What? Never mind whether we're living in a simulation. How much information that we take for granted is actually real, and how much is just fake? Like you lose. This is another thing, because I got off a plane from Spain yesterday, and suddenly I remembered, because in Spain sometimes in the winter you think, oh, it's a bit cold today, And I just remembered yesterday when I got off the plane in England that it isn't gold actually, but I think it's gold in Spain. It's just a little bit cooler than it normally is. You might need to put a jumper on, And but here, I was like, oh, and I didn't have my hat. I forgot to bring my hat with me because I'm just not used to wearing a hat. And I was wearing, my big snow jacket, a skiing jacket. I've got fleece on underneath it. And underneath that, I got a jumper, and underneath that, I got a t-shirt. So I was nice and toasty here, my face and hands, so I didn't have any gloves. Managed to put my gloves in my pockets, and they were kind of reasonably warm, but my head was freezing. And it just reminded me of that thing. You lose 90% of your body heat through your head. And I thought, absolutely correct. Right now, I'm losing 90% of my body heat, or thereabouts, through my head. But it's just another sort of piece of information that's just been completely taken out of context. And how much is that, and how much is, and if we are living in a simulation, it's all part of the plan. We're deliberately confusing ourselves with Chinese whispers and filling our heads with incorrect, inaccurate knowledge. I don't know. But anyway, I like the idea that we're living in a simulation. I like Black Mirror, the TV series Black Mirror, as you know. And that comes up in it quite a lot. They've got simulated. Each episode is unique, but they've had many episodes with a simulated game that people get into, or a simulated universe. And in some ways, when we watch any movie or film or TV show, they're all kind of simulated universes in a way. But they're actors, and it's kind of two-dimensional, and they know what they're doing. But it is a kind of simulated reality in a way. So would we create simulations? Pretty 99.9% sure we would. And will we be able to? Even if it's ourselves, would we create a simulation of the whole of our history? And then you could travel back in time and visit the Roman Empire, and see Genghis Khan, and marvel at Cleopatra's nose, or whatever it is. Would you do these things?
Because it's simulated doesn't mean that it's accurate. That's what I would say there.
Yeah, but even your memory of this interaction and this conversation is not going to be the same as mine, And so, yeah, our reality is in a way, is actually kind of simulated anyway, because it comes through our eyes, our ears, our smell, taste, and touch. And I've heard that there are a load of other different, senses, and certainly some animals have different senses that we don't have. But essentially, for human beings, it's that, and we're very visual in particular. But our brains just interpret all of this for us, all of these things. And was it Albert Einstein who answered the question of why the sky is blue? Until then, nobody knew. So, it might not have been blue. Somebody's idea of blue could be somebody else's green or red or whatever. So. And you get people who are colorblind who look at the same thing, but they don't see the same thing as us because usually it's red and green. So colorblind people are often not allowed to drive cars because they might drive through the traffic lights. They're really not, anyone with colorblindness is not actually seeing exactly the same thing that you and I might, because then they haven't got the depth, they're not seeing the different red and green colors. And other animals, cats, they've got fairly sort of limited colour spectrum and stuff like this. So we're all just interpreting the universe anyway. So in a way, the simulation is going on in our head, our brain. And so when our brain dies, the simulation for us is over. It's just a question of whether the entire universe is simulated or whether it's just our perception.
That's one of the things which... I know we're probably getting to the end of the call, but one of the things that I was thinking about, if you're willing to entertain that it is a simulation, are you willing to entertain that you're the only one that the simulation is about? Like, are other people as important if they're just, simulated people?
That's a very good question. Do you know, I'll tell you something. When I was about 9 years old, I had this weird idea that there were only two people in the world. Me and everyone else pretending to be everyone else.
It's Truman Show stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah, but I really thought about this at the time, and because in a way, I think maybe we should be asking our kids more, because they've got none of the preconceived ideas. You know, they approach the world with open eyes and with an open mind. And certainly when I was a kid, I remember having that thought, because I asked my mother if must have blown her mind, "Mummy, are you real? Are you everyone else?" And so, you know, if that's true, then from my perspective, maybe I am real, and you, Tom, sitting over there, are everyone else. You know, and so are any potential listeners. In which case, can you give me a bit more money, please?
Yeah, on watching some of the videos around simulation theory, there was like so many funny comments about can I have an upgrade of my software, or I need a patch.
Yeah.
Like my simulation is like watching a screen 9 hours a day.
Yeah. No, that's
watching
true.
too many YouTube videos.
Yeah. No, but it is true. I mean, it's but you know, in the Matrix, they actually answer that question really well. You know, well, if it's a simulation, if it's not real, why is it so rubbish? And the answer is, well, the original Matrix was like paradise on earth, but the humans we didn't believe it, and we fought against it. It just couldn't be true. So, you know, maybe it has to have all these flaws to keep it interesting.
So, your conclusion on simulation theory?
Well, let's conclude with the fact that we don't really know. But perhaps, if you'd like to give me your how convinced are you on it as a percentage?
I will be convinced by any good argument, and at the moment, I don't think that there is one, and so I'm not convinced.
But how, you know, 50%, 60, 40, 100, 99, 1, where are you at?
I'm at 0.
Well, that 0 to me means that you've rejected it wholly. And
I've rejected it until there's a really good argument, or until there's sufficient evidence, and then until then it's not.
Well, if anyone listens to this and they can come up with a really good argument that will change Tom's mind, I think he's thrown out the challenge to you. So
I feel free. I'm happy to listen to good arguments, because there's no point in walking around being wrong about things.
That's true.
You want to walk around being right about things.
That's correct.
And so if someone asks me about the simulation theory in the future and I don't have a good argument for it, then I want to have a better one.
Well,
what about you?
For my part, I would say that when I was 9, I kind of put it to bed thinking, well, this is a ridiculous idea that I had, that I'm one person and everyone else. It's very narcissistic, although I didn't know that word back then. So, you know, but ultimately I see the entire world from within my head. My eyes take the world into my body and my brain. And so everything by default is narcissistic, because I only get one view of the world. Much as I'd like to change my viewpoint, the only way I can do so is to get up and walk over and sit somewhere else, or to look at a video or something like that, and kind of physically change the way that I view the world. And so I guess when I was 9, that kind of made sense to me, and then I quickly put it to bed, because it's just a nonsense. And the first stumbling block I came about back then was that if there are only 2 people, what happens when there's multiple people in a classroom, for example? All the other school kids, are they all just, you know, one person pretending to be lots? It's a ridiculous concept. So from that point onwards, I just kind of forgot about it from the age of 9, pretty much until I did my family tree and came up with the ancestor paradox. And then I thought, well, where are all these people? We cannot be that inbred. I mean, we must be more than we believe ourselves to be, but it cannot be that much. To go back thousands of years, millions of years since the first sort of humanoid kind of ancestors stepped out of the trees, you know, they just can't have been. And there would have been, you know, bottlenecks and multiple deaths, and there would have been maybe only, you know, I heard someone say, well, from, was her name Lucy, the first one that they found, you know, perhaps she wasn't our ancestor. Well, no, she was, because they found some DNA that matched or something. Maybe only one of the people alive in the world that day actually has ancestors who are still alive today. But even so, when you go back in time, you know, they're doubling each time. You know, it just seems mathematically impossible. Hence, it's an unsolved question. It's the ancestor paradox. And so that really got me thinking, well, if that doesn't make sense, what did you say it was the other day? Last time we talked, you said something. Occam's razor, which I like.
Occam's razor.
I'm going to turn it right back on its head.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, because, or to quote Sherlock Holmes, or to misquote him, or to paraphrase him in any case, if all other options are impossible, then there must be the improbable, the highly improbable, or the practically impossible. But still, it must be that. And until we can come up with, until someone can tell me and give me a very well thought out and structured argument, which can convince me that we can go back in time all these generations and actually solve the ancestor paradox in a way that I can believe, then I have to say that it doesn't seem realistic to me. And it's really got me thinking, thrown all this up into my head again, which is why I guess we're discussing it now, because it's just wrong. It's just wrong. The ancestor paradox does not make sense. We just cannot simply go back, and you hear about it all the time, and very little people ever talk about it. You hear about the world getting bigger in numbers, and there being more and more people being born, and people are living longer, and there's more and more pressure on everything in the world because of the sheer volume of people, and yet we don't really know how many people there'll be in the future, and there could be some horrible earthquake that kills millions of people, and there could be a plague and this, that, and other, an asteroid strike or whatever. But we do know that every single person who's ever lived has a mother and a father, and they have a mother and father, and so on and so forth. So, it just, the numbers don't work out. And when I was a little boy at school and they were teaching me maths, they said, if you don't know the answer, before you do, try to solve a difficult equation, kind of throw a ballpark number there onto the page and think, well, I think it's going to be roughly in the hundreds. And then if it comes out in the tens of thousands, then you've probably got something wrong there, So roughly the number it's going to be. And so, if it comes out a surprising number, then you probably made a mistake, go back and check it. And so it's like that. There is a problem with the ancestor paradox. And I want someone to solve that, and that's kind of created a crack in the way that I look at the whole world, because I'm now being forced to say, well, if it's impossible, and it may not be, and there may be a valid explanation, hopefully there is, but until someone more clever than I can possibly ever imagine being can come up and tell me, look, this is the ancestor paradox, this is it solved, this is the reason, that's how it worked. Well, then I have to question, reality, because if that cannot be, then the least probable, or the highly improbable, which is that we're living in a simulation, must present itself for contemplation.
Okay. All right. Well, interesting discussion.
Right, there you are. Okay, well, I'm sure that we've not answered anyone's questions, but hopefully we've got some things to think about.
Entertained ourselves for a bit.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Anyway, it's been great as always, and I look forward to next week's exciting discussion of what's that going to be about, Tom?
I don't think we've decided it yet, to be honest, but I'm sure we'll come up with something.
And we're going to have a guest soon or something?
Yes. I can't remember the exact date. I think that actually might be
the 9th.
Next week, I think, actually, yeah. So
there you go.
That might be our only call. So, yeah, we can do that off our guest for the week. So, until next week.
That's been a pleasure, as always.
Catch you later.
Later.